Yep, you saw the title. I got COVID. Today I'll just share my personal experiences and takeaways. So the most likely way I got the virus was during my trip to Tahoe about 2 weeks ago. Basically, a day after school ended, me and my dad set off to Lake Tahoe and met a bunch of friends there, and we went to a cabin to live together. Stayed in the same cabin for 1 day and basically separated for the rest of the trip. And it turns out that on the 4th day of the trip, when everyone was separated, one of the people who were in our cabin felt a bit ill, and they were having a mild fever and a sore throat. And it turns out they got COVID-19. So this meant that me and my dad were high-risk individuals, and we had to get back home as soon as possible in order to infect as less people as possible. Due to the snowstorm, we were stuck in Tahoe for another day. And finally, on the 6th day of our trip, we came back home. So my dad and I immediately got tested back home for COVID using DIY test kits. So on the night we got back, we both tested negative, as well as during the next morning. However, I was experiencing symptoms including chills and a sore throat by that point. So, just to be extra sure, I went to the hospital for a PCR test. And that's basically just a more accurate test by the hospital. So 1 day later, the results came out, and as it turns out, I tested positive. And to be extra sure, I used the DIY kit again a day after I got tested positive during the PCR. And yeah, I also tested positive. So as for the symptoms, I don't think they started showing up all the way until I'd say the 5th day, basically 5 days after the meetup at the cabin. So on the 5th day, I slept with a bit of a sore throat, but there was really nothing else that was there. The next day, it was basically the same. And on the 7th day was when most of the symptoms started piling up. And basically, I woke up in the morning with a really dry throat. And it was to the point where I couldn't drink water without having it hurt. I also had a stuffy nose that day, but there were no signs of fever at all. So on the 8th day, my sore throat got a little bit better, but my temperature was constantly shifting between the borders of fever, low fever, yeah. It was on this day I got tested at the hospital. So on the 9th day, my sore throat and my low fever actually both got better, but I started coughing quite a bit. On New Year's Day, my sore throat finally disappeared. I did develop a stuffy nose and still coughed quite a bit. The next day, I got tested again using the DIY kit, and I still tested positive. However, my symptoms were basically all gone. Alright, my takeaways. So basically, one thing I've noticed throughout the course of getting COVID is that it really affects your motivation and energy. Back when my symptoms were really kicking in, I feel like I was kind of demotivated. I didn't have the energy to, say, go out on a run. I didn't have the energy to make another YouTube video. But otherwise, I'd say it's not really as bad as people says it was. Because a lot of people are like, oh, COVID, like lack of oxygen, you can't even breathe properly. No, I don't think it's like that. At least not for me. So what I've also noticed is that the infectivity of at least this variant for this particular winter break is much higher than say last year, because I noticed that say Lake Tahoe is not the only area with a lot of people getting infections. Places such as LA and just the Bay Area and other places in general are also facing a lot of COVID cases. And I also think that getting vaccinated helped me with milder symptoms, because in our cabin there were only 2 people who weren't vaccinated, and they were the only ones who got a fever that was really high. They had headaches, they had coughs, they had stuffy noses, sore throats, all of that, including a high fever. So yeah, I would say the vaccination helped with milder symptoms. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.